All right. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Carrie Sowden. I am the Director of Archaeology and Research here at the National Museum of the Great Lakes. I have been a staff member for 19 and a half years. I think I'm a little too scared to say 20 quite yet because I don't feel old enough to have had a job that long. But tonight we wanted to kind of talk about our archaeological work and the work that I am involved in, and talk about some of the three projects that I was involved in last summer. So this this program is sort of a three-part piece, and so to hopefully make everything work well, I will stop and take a break between each section if you want to ask questions about that specific one. And if there aren't any, then we will just plow on ahead. And don't worry, I'm also willing to go back at the end if there are further follow-up questions for all of those. For those of you that don't know, the Peachman Great Lakes Shipwreck Research Program is a part of the Great Lakes Historical Society, which is the owner and operator of the National Museum of the Great Lakes. We started a Lake Erie Shipwreck Research Center in 1999. In 2001, we got a fairly large bequest, so the Shipwreck Center became the Peachman Lake Erie Shipwreck Research Center. And as I came on in 2004 and the work that I was doing evolved, we decided this needed to not just focus on Lake Erie, but this shipwreck research program needed to be completely focused around the Great Lakes. And so that's why we have our lengthy name, the Peachman Great Lakes Shipwreck Research Program. All right, so let's get started. We'll jump right into May and June of 2023. The first project that I took part in was the Eastern Lake Erie Shipwreck Photogrammetry project. I made it. I made the name up. Let's just go with that. I wanted to be a part of this because photogrammetry is something that's becoming very popular around Great Lakes shipwrecks documentation, and it was something I needed to learn a little more about. Photogrammetry is the process of photographing and videoing a shipwreck and then putting it through a computer program that can then shape it into a three-dimensional digital rendering. And so we will see a few here as we go along. This project is something that's been led by Ken Merriman, who you see here. Ken is a retired computer engineer, and in his spare time as a computer engineer, not only had a full family, but also ran a dive charter boat up in the Minnesota area for years and years and years. Since he is retired, he has really gotten into the photogrammetry bug, for lack of a better word. He is really one of the best, if not the best, doing it on the Great Lakes. And so he and I met actually working through another project that didn't end up working out, but because of that, he was gracious enough to invite me along on for a week on his boat, the Hey Boy, which you also see here. Again, not the greatest picture I have of the Hey Boy, but you can kind of see it's a 36 foot long cabin cruiser. That this is what he used as his dive charter, and he told me that he used to take 8 divers on this boat, and I will tell you there were 4 of us on the boat, and it felt tight that way. So it was a fun experience to be with. We had again, because the boat's not that big, Ken keeps a rotating crew because a lot of people can't, give him the whole summer, this is what he does all summer, is goes out, dives on shipwrecks across the Great Lakes, collects data for photogrammetry, and publishes models. But we had a crew of 4 of us. So it was Ken, myself, Andrew Goodman, and the state underwater archaeologist from Wisconsin, Tamara Thompson. And you will see that all of us were very excited to be in the land of where we could get timbits. And so the timbits will show up again as well. They seem to show up in a lot of our photographs. And this was basically for 7 days, we went out and went diving on shipwrecks. Ken had an idea, a list of things that he was interested in getting, and sort of a way he wanted to bring the boat around. So we met the boat up in Canada and got on. We went out down Long Point, came up, spent some more days going a little bit further east, and then came back across to Dunkirk, New York, where we got off on the last day. and did quite a bit of diving. I will say, I will be honest, I am not a deep wreck diver. So I did 3 or 4 of these sites. Of the 9 sites that we did, the others were well beyond my capabilities in terms of their depth. Andrew and Tammy and Ken are all rebreather divers, so they can go and do things at 140, 160, 180 feet without a problem. And that's good. Now, doing this takes quite a bit. We start by, sort of finding the site and getting a good understanding of it. And I picked this one because it's been a while since I've seen a side scan sonar image that was kind of so pretty. And you could also see the reflection of my phone in the screen. But this is the Oneida. It also is known as the Arches wreck. This is an old steamer that had those giant hogging arches that were so popular. It was built in 1846 and sank in Canadian waters of Lake Ontario or Lake Erie. We're going to get to Lake Ontario in a minute. Sank in Canadian waters of Lake Erie in 1852. And again, this is fairly deep, well below the recreational limits. So you guys are still kind of going, okay, so what? What are we doing here? What we are doing is putting a diver in the water with a camera. And Ken has put together this excellent system where I'm pointing because everybody can see this is like a scooter that divers use underwater to move. And then he's put his camera on top of it along with a full lighting system. And so this goes down with the diver, and then they just run the scooter back and forth in passes in a very specific way, making sure that they're getting all sides of everything. And so we send them when we're in super deep water, we send them on their way, and then we sit on the surface where, as you can see, it was fairly flat almost all of the week, and wait. Again, fortunately, when we were in the shallower wrecks, I was able to get in the water, kind of watch the process, try it out a little bit myself. And that was a lot of fun. I will tell you, photogrammetry is not just jump in the water, take a video, and okay, you're good. There is a very specific way the video needs to be taken. There's lighting that has to be taken care of. And then there's the knowledge of what to do with that. And I will tell you, this is sort of what I was kind of excited to learn about. Although, of course, like most things, it can be the most boring. I always like to put this picture up because it can show you, this is the table on the boat and all of the charging that we are trying to do between the big camera, multiple GoPros, all of the lights each have batteries that need charging. The scooter itself needs charging, all of the cameras, which I mentioned. Then there's the computer plus all of our own personal phones. There is a lot of power coming out of this boat to do this work. But basically, when we come back and we're finished for the day, Ken sits down and downloads all the video and begins the work around dealing with the video, which is pulling out individual images and then putting it through the software that will then hopefully stitch it together. And this takes anywhere from 6 to 12 to 14 hours. He would often get it ready before the evening was over, and then we would drape a towel over the screen so it wouldn't bother us. And we'd go to bed and hopefully we'd wake up in the morning and it would work. Oh, look, there's the Timbits again. And when it does, we get really beautiful 3-dimensional models. So this is the 3-dimensional model of the Oneida, or at least the first pass of it. You can see that there are, he's got a little bit of a hole right here. I know he needed to go back and do some more work around that. One of the not throwbacks, but problems with photogrammetry is, when you go gather the data, you need to gather it basically all at the same time, because as sites change, and that just means zebra mussels moving around, the computer program can't stitch it all together correctly. And so, but we're trying to get as much done as possible. And some of these are not being completed for several months. Like I said, we went out on 9 shipwrecks. And of those 9 from those 7 days, I believe at this point, only 4 have been fully completed. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but you have to realize this is the beginning of the summer. Ken worked all the way through, let's see, he was still working in mid-September when I talked to him. So he was out gathering ship data on vessels like these for 4 months. And so he has a lot of data to get through to do this. With all archaeological projects, there's always something funny to talk about. And I have to tell you, this was one of the more, I'll be honest, gross nights. We did go out one night and we anchored and we stayed out on the lake overnight, which was really lovely until the mayflies started hatching. This is the view from my bed out the window, and you can see all the flies out there. We woke up the next morning and they were all mostly dead, but there were a lot of them, to the point that I was literally scooping them up with a dustpan. It may have been possibly the grossest thing I've ever seen, but it's an interesting and excellent memory for this project. Now, I want to tell you guys all about what Ken is doing with all of this data. What he has done is with the Great Lakes GLSP, Great Lakes Shipwreck Preservation Society, he has developed a website called 3dshipwrecks.org. And I highly encourage you, when this is over tomorrow, whatever, go visit it and play around with it, because it really is a lot of fun. There are ways to, there are a bunch of different ways to find different shipwrecks. You will see here, I pulled up the map of Lake Erie, which is how you can choose these. Most of these shipwrecks seem to be down at the far eastern end, and there's a very specific reason for that. This technology relies on photos and video, and unfortunately, the visibility in the central and western basins of Lake Erie is not always great. If you had a really great day, I think you could do some, but we don't have them often enough to plan to do this kind of work in a very regular way. It's not that we can't, we just can't get to the planning aspect of it quite right. And so we're going to try and work on that. But as it goes, we're starting to get some down here. Ken's project is certainly not being done completely by him. He really wants this to be a crowdsourced project. And so there are people from all over the Great Lakes who are submitting to him these three-dimensional models that you can then find on his website. We are looking at the Carlingford, which is a schooner that sank in 1881, which was part of the project. One of the things that I've worked on when I was there. And hold on just a second, because I actually do have his website pulled up, and I wanted to share with you what these three-dimensional models look like. So if you go to it and you say pull one up, this is the Raleigh, which is a slightly shallower wreck, and you can spin it around. And you start to see, when you go in flat, you can see, okay, there's not a lot of relief in there, but then you can also zoom in. And archaeologists are doing, whoa, sorry, I didn't mean to do that, doing really amazing things with these three-dimensional shipwrecks. If they're done well and right, you can actually go in and take measurements off of them. The Wisconsin Historical Society, Tamara Thompson, has developed a method where you can use this photogrammetry as a way to monitor shipwrecks and watch their change. So basically, you could go out to a site, take a photogrammetry model, maybe go back in 3 or 4 years or 10 years, take another model, and then the best way I know how to describe that is subtract the models, and then they will show you where change is taking place. So we can, as archaeologists and divers, monitor what is going, how the ship is degrading, and what changes are happening. So like I said, I highly recommend going out to 3dshipwrecks.org to check it out, and you can play with these things that are really just a ton of fun to play with at all the time. So that's what I have for the first part of my project. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to take them now. Otherwise, we can keep moving on. And again, I will take shipwrecks again, or take questions at the end, of course, as well. All right. So we'll keep going here. The next project is Lake Ontario. Remember, I said Lake Ontario was coming. This is the Galoo Island shipwreck. This is a small shipwreck that was noticed off Galoo Island, which is a small private island at the east end of Lake Ontario. And it was actually discovered by one of the island caretakers. They have small planes that take them back and forth. And she happened to look down on a very clear day and noticed that that there was something under the water there in fairly shallow water. She told her son about it, who contacted Tim Kaza and Dennis Gerber, who went out to, let me see if I can't get this. There we go. Whoa, went too far. There we go. Who went out and to check out the shipwreck. And so we're looking here at an aerial photo that Tim took with his drone, and you can see this beautiful little shipwreck sitting out here. And they took a look at it, confirmed that it was there, took a three-dimensional model of it, and then it sort of became, you know, again, what we do is sort of a small community. There was something interesting about this, which I'll get to in a second, but you know, it was kind of an interesting thing to look at. Here we go. Here's Galoo Island. So this is the far end of Lake Ontario. You can see Oswego down here and Kingston up here. And Galoo is this little island out there. It's 14 miles off Sackett's Harbor, I believe. And we worked up here on the southeastern corner of the island. So as I mentioned, Tim and Dennis had gone out in 2022 and confirmed the wreck, made a three-dimensional model of it, and gave it an initial identification of the Northern Light. One of the things that they noticed about this that they found really interesting is this piece right here in the center. This is a dagger board. A lot of sailing vessels would have either had long keels or they might have had center boards. And the difference between a dagger board and a center board is a dagger board actually just raises straight up, whereas a center board pivots up. And so we have a couple of these around the Great Lakes. Here's this is a drawing of the three brothers, which sank in 1827. The Three Brothers was actually built on Galoo Island, and you can see the dagger board here. And then this is another unknown shipwreck, early shipwreck from the early 1800s, with, again, you can see the dagger board sticking straight up out of it. And so if we go back to our shipwreck and we look at this and we see our dagger board here, but it's been called the Northern Light. And the reason this is interesting is dagger boards go out of style by the 1840s at the absolute latest. Honestly, we've not seen a whole lot. I mean, honestly, there's probably only 4 or 5 known shipwrecks that have dagger boards on them in the Great Lakes. This vessel, the Northern Light, was built in 1899 and sank in 1916. What is this shipwreck doing with this ancient technology or ancient way to steer and keep course? And so it's really kind of interesting, which, you know, again, came to my attention. I contacted my colleague, Ben Ford at Indiana University of Pennsylvania, and we decided, you know, hey, we talked to Tim and Dennis and definitely working with them, and we're able to get some funding to go out and at least do a survey of the site. And a survey just means we're going to take and measure and document what we can see there and what is there. So with our limited funds from the Institute of Nautical Archaeology, as well as some funding from IUP, we headed off to the east end of Lake Ontario. Tim and Dennis were kind enough to let us use their boats for this project, as they were part of it. And they each have their own boat. You know, well, Carrie, why do you need 2 boats? Well, there's 6 of us and a lot of gear. And so it just made things more comfortable. So we would cruise out with all of the crew on Dennis's boat here, while Tim's boat took the all of the gear, and that's what we used as our dive platform. And so we went out over the course of 10 or 11 days and dived for 7 days in this very shallow water. I believe I already mentioned it was shallow. It's about 12 feet deep. The shipwreck, we divided into sort of 6 quadrants as a way to attack it on a very hopefully planned way. The shipwreck itself is not that long, right on the deck line. It's about 75 or 80, I shouldn't say it's about 78.2 feet. And with a fairly lengthy bowsprit that's just not quite 28 feet long, but that's where we started the 0. I do like to point out this was our planning board that we used every day to do orientations with, and our one student decided to throw in our little friend here, the bass, who like to hang out around the stern area with us every day. We were able to go out, as I said, for 7 days. We laid a baseline down the center of the vessel and then used mostly trilateration, but also some offsets and some other things to get some really good data. By working with the the University of Indiana University of Pennsylvania and a college professor, we were able to bring 2 students with us, one from IUP and one from Slippery Rock University. And so that was a very important thing that Ben and I were interested in when we put this project together, was a way to be able to help teach and bring along people that are interested in what we're doing and what it is that we do as, I don't know, as what we do as underwater archaeologists. One of the nice things was there was another underwater archaeologist who's working out of Syracuse area, who was able to come in, who has an interest in dagger boards, and was able to come in and really take a lot of measurements on the dagger board so we can start to get a better idea of it. And this is his rendering. Our site plan is here. This is a project. This is a pretty large project. And so this is something that's still in the works. Ben and I are still working on a final report as well as a finalized site plan. But you can see here, we need to drop, this is our baseline just down the side of it. This is the dagger board. This has 2 big cargo holds. So one very large one here, and then the other one surrounding the dagger board. We did find some really interesting building techniques with this, and I don't know how to better describe it than to say, Ben said one night, this vessel's really weirdly put together. It's almost like somebody's grandfather built boats, who told his kids about it, who told their kids about it, and all of a sudden the grandson decided he could build a boat too. There are definitely methods of building in this boat that are unlike things that we have seen before, and to be honest, don't make a whole lot of sense. And so for that reason, we definitely plan on going back. We are looking at 2025. We want to work with the state of New York to get a permit to do some excavation. Not only are we interested in the dagger board and sort of this unusual building style, I mean, we didn't even get into it. This is where I get too excited about things. We didn't really even get into the type of boat this is. This is a scow schooner, scow dagger board schooner, which means it's double-ended. When I say double-ended, I mean it's flat on both ends. You can see kind of right here, it's a flat thing. This was part of a fleet known as the hay scows from the eastern end of Lake Ontario. These are small vessels that worked from, the mid to late 1800s into the early 1900s, as the Northern Light did, moving hay, but also lots of other goods. We know the Northern Light carried wheat, it carried rock and sand, but it also carried like railroad ties at one point when they were building. And the thing is these are very regional boats. So these are small boats that are meant to stay close to land, kind of hug the coast. The Northern Light, I think the furthest I've been able to find that it went south is to Oswego. And it really never went very far north. In fact, I'm not even 100% sure if it made it into Canadian waters. We're still doing some research around that. But this is sort of one of those little unknown, I don't want to say unknown, we know about them, but not highly studied vessels. And so this is one of the reasons we're kind of excited about going back, is to learn a little bit more, get more information about the hay scow, but also get more information about the dagger board and such. And so maybe we'll do this again in early 2026 after I come back from Galoo Island to talk some more about what we learned there. Okay, I have a question here. I should have answered. I tried to. What is a dagger board? So a dagger board is a piece of wood, well, really multiple pieces of wood that you lower down through the bottom of the vessel, and so it gives you a very long piece in the water that helps you steer a straight line, for a lack of a better word. If you see big sailboats out of the water today, they have that big long bottom piece of their keel, and so it's there to help make sure that the boat stays straight, but the ability to raise it up and down allows you to pull into shallow areas, and give it and pull into shallow areas and not be worried about how much draft you have. A small scow schooner like this had a draft of 3 or 4 feet. But with the dagger board down, its draft is probably 8 or 9 feet. And so when you can pull it up, but it sails much better with it down. I have somebody asking, are we sure it's the Northern Light? I'm going to say no, but everything about it seems to answer. We know the Northern Light sank off Galoo Island. It had been loading stone at the basically its neighbor island when a strong wind came up, carried the Northern Light over to Galoo Island, where it kind of beached on a ridge. The 4 sailors that were on it were able to get off and get onto Galoo Island and save themselves. And the Northern Lights sort of remained there, and it remained up on this not piling, but this ridge throughout the time. And so where I'm headed with this, until it eventually comes off the ridge and down into the little bay that it's in. Where I'm headed with this in terms of why this makes sense, it's the right size. Outside of the dagger board, everything else about it is saying, this is a late 1800s, early 1900s. There is a very large iron winch up at the front of it, which again, we're tracking down the maker of. We have the maker's mark off of it, and they're definitely working in the late 1800s, early 1900s. The other thing that that sort of lends it to this being the Northern Lights is the fact that this boat is basically, we get down on there and there's nothing left. The masts have both been taken out. There is no rudder. There is no tiller. There's basically nothing littering the surface like you would for a completely abandoned shipwreck. So a shipwreck like this that might have gotten caught up on this ridge, they probably came out a few days later and stripped anything of value off of it and then just left it. And then later in the year, the storm pushed it on into this other little bay in Galoo. And so there you go. That's the story of the Galoo Island work that I've been doing. Let me turn on my pages here. All right, here we go. Last one. This is a project that I did in August of 2023. It's a project I've been involved with for 3 years now, and I'm very pleased and excited and proud to be a part of it. This is also, I'm going to tell you the story, but I'm also going to let you know we are actually currently hosting a micro exhibit about this story and this project at the museum, and it'll be up at the National Museum of the Great Lakes through the end of March. And that is the story of the Tuskegee Airman, the Second Lieutenant Frank Moody, and his airplane that crashed and sank into Lake Huron. As I mentioned, this past summer was my 3rd year. I've been working with them now for, 3 years. I haven't been there the entire time, but I've spent quite a bit of time with them. I do want to start at the beginning though here. This is Lieutenant Frank Moody, Second Lieutenant Frank Moody of the U.S. Army. Frank was born in Oklahoma and raised in L.A. And as World War II came around, Frank actually had some aviation experience, and he decided to join, and he wanted to be a pilot. Because of his race, he was sent to Tuskegee, Alabama, where they did all of the training for all of the African-American pilots, ground crews, radar men, anybody who associated with a plane got trained there. Many men from Tuskegee, when their training was done, was sent off to mostly the European battlefield, but many of them also then continued on for further training. Frank and his squadron were sent up to Selfridge Air Force Base just north of Detroit here on the Great Lakes. One of the reasons they did a lot of training up in that area is they felt that Lake Huron mimicked the conditions that a pilot might see around Italy. So I guess the daylight, how the waters move, how the climate and such. So it gave them a way to sort of train in the appropriate climate. Frank was training in the aircrafts that you see here. This is a P-39 Cobra aircraft, P-39Q Air Cobra. It's a lot of words for me to remember all the time. It has some interesting aspects to it, and please don't ask me questions about planes because I am still learning. This was a really new experience for me to talk about planes. You know, I could talk about boats and how they're built, and I'm just starting to learn about planes. It's kind of interesting. This was a one-seater plane, so the pilot would sit up here. Right behind him is the engine. And it's my understanding that that's sort of an unusual place to put the engine, so the pilot is a little more forward than would normally have been. The plane has 3 guns, 2 on each on the wing, and then he has another one down here, kind of in the belly of the vessel, or of the vessel. See, this is how much I don't talk about airplanes. In the belly of the plane, right under the pilot. Now you're going to look at that and say, wait a minute, how does that shoot? Because the propeller's right there. Well, the propeller and the gun, so the gun is a machine gun, are actually timed together. So when a pilot, or Frank, hits the machine gun, it is timed to shoot through these propellers as they're spinning. It's really a fantastic, I think, feat. So Frank, as I said, was training, and they went out on April 11th, 1944. And they did a 4-man training run over Lake Huron. The first 2 did their training runs, and Frank came in. He came in low. This is what they were doing, very close. He began his training run, started firing into the lake, and all of a sudden there was black smoke, and the other 3 pilots talked about how the plane sort of somersaulted over itself and ended up in the water. I've had people ask me if they went back to look for the plane or to recover it. I don't know if they did or not. Lieutenant Moody's body was recovered a few days later and sent home to be buried with his family with full honors. The thing that this story gets a little, I don't believe in weird stuff, but this is a little weird. It is literally 70 days, 70 years to the day when the site is discovered again. It is discovered on April 11th, 2014 by David and Drew Lazinski, who were out in this area looking for a barge that they had heard that had sunk in 1980. And they have this really interesting way of looking for shipwrecks. It's fairly clear out there, so they put a guy on. It's sort of called boarding. So you have a diver who holds on the board and is very towed across the bottom, and so you're actually visually looking for shipwrecks. And so they did this, and they saw something that they thought was a car door and didn't really think that much about it, and they kept going. And then all of a sudden they saw a wingspan, and they realized fairly quickly that they had found an airplane. And over the years, they began talking with people about what to do with it, not realizing quite what the importance of this airplane was. So there were a couple of different plans, and then eventually the state underwater archaeologist from Michigan, Wayne Lusardi, became involved with the project, and they were out one day and they were actually able to find the basically the airplane serial number, and were able to track it and place it to be Lieutenant Moody's airplane. Once that happened, any other plans that they may have had quickly changed. Wayne Lusardi was in contact with the Tuskegee Airmen National Historical Museum that's actually housed in Detroit. And so the state and the Tuskegee Museum began together a lengthy project to fully document this airplane wreck and eventually recover and hopefully put on display the remains of Frank Moody's airplane. I will say, as I mentioned, he hit the water fairly quickly. This airplane wreck is spread out over about a square mile. It is very disarticulated. However, the wingspan, which is what we're looking at right here, is one of the most intact pieces that there are. And there are things, I mean, as this plane has hit, it is being torn apart, and there are certain areas that are just in shatters. But then you look at, say, here, the port wheel, we think it might actually still have air in it. If not, it's holding its shape really well. see over here, the starboard wheel has actually come off the hub. So this rubber tire is still hanging onto the hub here, and we're at, 80 years later now. So it's been a really interesting project. This is the engine that would have sat right behind Frank Moody, and was part of the work that I did last year, was documenting this. Pardon me, excuse me. I think hopefully you have noticed as I have talked through this, no project is done alone. Very rarely do you find an archaeological project that's being done by a single entity. And this is certainly not one of them. Not only do you have the state DNR involved, and you have the Tuskegee Airmen involved, but now you also have the National Museum of the Great Lakes, Diving for a Cause, Dan, Divers Alert Network. There's a lot of partners in this. And one of the things that was even more interesting as I worked on this project was that National Geographic came, but that's a whole nother story that I want to get too far into, but we'll talk about that in a minute. It is somewhat unusual for the Great Lakes. With the plan for this site is to recover everything that we can find. It is all going back to the Tuskegee Museum, where it was being conserved and will eventually be put on display. I kind of wanted to show, because there are some fun things that came out here. This is the gauge panel. This is the first piece that they found with the serial number on it. This is the piece that helped identify the site. Again, these pieces of glass, as hard as this hit, and have been in all of 35 feet of water for 70 years, still intact. There's the running light that's, again, right on top of the wing, still just sitting there. And then in this shallow site in 35 feet, sometimes from the surface, you can even see the star that's painted on the wing from the surface, which the first day I was out there, and again, as I mentioned from early on, in Lake Erie, we do not have great visibility here off Ohio waters. And so, to look down 35 feet and be able to see the outline of this wing and this star was just the first time really, really stunning for me. It's been kind of an exciting project, as we are finding, we're talking about these big pieces, but there's also lots of small finds that we're finding as well. This is all being done a couple of different ways. Wayne Lusardi had the Sheriff's Department come out and do a very large metal detector search over, the square mile, and they put pin flags on everything that they found. Then the archaeologists, we would go back, find the pin flags, figure out what was there, and record it, document it, make sure we have the location, and then it gets recovered. And so this is one of those pieces. This is actually the camera that would have been inside that would that was run when every time you were doing a gun strafing. This is not necessarily for training, but when you're in battle, you would make sure that this is running so that you can see, so your superiors and others can see how much damage occurred. They can make sure that they're monitoring what you're doing. We all had a really lovely thought that maybe there was still film in there, but alas, this is one thing 70 years underwater did not maintain. My second year there, we came up with this second gauge board that has a clock in it, and it shows us exactly when this happened at about 3:40 in the afternoon. And just to know that specifically is really kind of chilling when we talk about this accident. The other thing that we found a lot of is there was a lot of ammunition. There was, as I mentioned, a machine gun. There was also a 50 caliber gun. So we have two different sizes of ammunition that are just littered across the way there. These are all being handled very, very carefully because these were live rounds. Yes, they are waterlogged, but they are, when we were handling them, it was always a very, very careful handling. And I tried to keep my hands off them as much as possible because I didn't want to get a finger blown off. Not that it would have, but that's sort of what we were thinking about. And so I'm sure you guys are asking now, okay, so you've brought all this stuff up. What does that mean? All of these things have gone, as I said, to the airfield where the Tuskegee, part of the Tuskegee Museum is, including, this is one of the guns that was recovered. All three guns were recovered. This is the engine that was recovered just this past summer. One of the things that I can't believe I didn't put it in here. I talked about a lot of different things, but what made this happen? What happened to Frank Moody? Why did he end up in the water like this. And what we were able to find is we actually found all three propellers of all three blades of the propeller. They all had a bullet hole in them. And so the assumption is that basically the timing for that machine gun under the belly of the plane and the timing with the propeller must have been off, and unfortunately the plane shot itself down. This has been a really big and interesting and important project, and as I mentioned, a lot of people have been involved, and one of the things that I think is really exciting is the fact that we're able to tell this story and tell this story here in the Great Lakes. In 2021, they erected a monument in Port Huron to the 15 pilots that were lost while training over here, 4 of which were lost over Lake Erie. And so 15, not just 15 pilots, the 15 Tuskegee airmen that were lost while training in the area. And again, 4 of those were lost over Lake Huron. And so it's been really quite moving to be a part of this. And I believe we're going back for one more summer, and I'm very excited to be a part of that, and can't wait to see what they do with everything that we have found. I will leave with, again, as I always say, a ridiculous story. I know I mentioned that National Geographic came out in 2022 and 2023. There will be a special about this project on National Geographic sometime in June. We have not been told a specific air date. Now, that being said, it's supposed to, I couldn't tell anybody that National Geographic was out there. You have to sign all these things. We're now allowed to say it. But I got to tell you, it's not a lot of fun. We didn't get a lot of work done the days that they were there. And I get it. They're doing something very particular. But one day we were sitting around, and it was great because they fed us. And so we were sitting around eating lunch, and they were interviewing somebody on the boat. So we were just sort of scattered around the marina. And I don't even know how this guy managed to get this picture, but there were some ducks swimming around. I was trying not to feed them. I'm not a big animal feeder, but gosh darn it, if a duck didn't jump right up and try and take a bite out of my shoe. And somehow this cameraman, or who's the sound guy, was sitting there eating his lunch across from me and was able to grab this picture of the duck eating my shoe. Anyway, and so that's what I have on the Tuskegee Airmen as well. Again, I want to remind you guys, we do have a micro exhibit about this up at the museum. So if you have the opportunity, please come visit it. I am working with Wayne Lusardi to make sure that we get an article or 2 or 3 for Inland Seas. He has talked about writing sort of a series about this project, and I'm looking forward to having those as well. Okay, questions. Here we go. How about using IR as well as visible for these models? Oh, I'm assuming yes, this is back from when I was talking about the photogrammetry. I don't know the answer to that. I'm not sure how IR would work underwater, but it's something to certainly be talked about. I don't know. I'll have to call Ken and talk to him about that and find out if that's the answer, if that's another way to go. Are there any more questions tonight? All right, well, you guys made it easy. I hope I told you everything you ever wanted to know. This is, sort of one of our first, not one of our first, we do our annual 4th of July, that's members only, but we're trying to do some more members only events in the future. And so hopefully we will see you again on any one of our platforms. Outside of the members only part, you are invited to take part in any of our ongoing programming. There is sorry, the Great Lakes Book Club will meet again on March 5th, where they're going to talk about the Great Lakes Water Wars. And then again on April 2nd, when they're going to read The Firekeeper's Daughter. Don't forget, as I've mentioned, the micro exhibit is up at the museum, but at this point we are also have an ongoing online exhibit on flags of the Great Lakes. Right now we are focused on racing and yacht flags, and it's kind of a fun thing to visit on our website, nmgl.org. And now the questions are coming in. I will leave my last follow-up to start answering these. I have a question here. How can members get involved in the research? That's actually a really great question. And I should have talked more about that at the beginning. I made notes, but I, of course, then don't pay attention to them. The National Museum of the Great Lakes works with a very dedicated group of volunteers called MASS, the Maritime Archaeological Survey Team. And we do training once a year, and then we go out and survey shipwrecks in Lake Erie waters. I did not talk about it in this program because we didn't get any work done last year, but we are starting and revving up for work coming up this coming summer. We are going to have our training workshop April, I want to say 13 and 14, whatever that weekend is, 13, 14, 15, whatever the Saturday, Sunday is. And sign up for that is going to begin in the next couple of days. And we will certainly be reaching out to our membership to let them know that that's available. Outside of that and some of the other stuff, you know, if you want to give me a call, we can talk about, you know, some of the book research. We talked a lot tonight about the field research, and I will say this, and I say this a lot. My professor in my first day of grad school basically said, you know, for every week you spend in the field, you're going to spend 4 to 5 months researching, writing, analyzing data, sorting things, organizing, whatever. So this is these projects that we're talking about. The field work is great. Don't get me wrong. It's a lot of fun, but there is a lot of work and research involved after the fact. And there's always help needed with that. And I have another question about the Northern Lights. Is it buried or collapsed? The answer is it is buried. So yes, as you looked at that top level, it's basically buried right up to the deck line. And so there's quite a bit below there, we believe. And again, we'd like to go in and kind of take a look at it if we can, not this summer, but next summer, just to get a better understanding again of how this weird little vessel is built. Learn more about, you know, why they, maybe see if we can figure out why they would choose a dagger board over a center board, something along those lines. So we will see. But yes, it's buried, not collapsed. So there's that. Okay. If that's the end of those, I'll get to my last point. Hopefully I will see you guys again soon. Our spring lecture series, which is sponsored this year or this spring by Impact Employment Solutions, will start on March 14th, when we will talk about the world of songbird migration. And we will have the director of the Black Swamp Bird Observatory to come in and talk to us about songbirds around the Great Lakes and how we can see them. I'm getting very excited as we continue to grow, that we are continuing to grow our I don't want to say our outreach, but our topic. I mean, and migratory birds are part of Great Lakes history. They've been here, they come here, and they are around. And so bringing in new and interesting topics, not like this, and not just, you know, here's this giant steamer that went down in 1975. And I don't mean that in a bad way. The Edmund Fitzgerald is very exciting and interesting, but we're bringing in other new topics. And I see I have one last question that I'll do here. Are there other plane wrecks? There are lots of airplane wrecks across the Great Lakes. There's actually quite a few World War II airplane wrecks in Lake Michigan, where there was naval air training on the Wolverine and Sable off of Chicago, which were the aircraft carriers that were created out of two passenger vessels, and they were used to train lots of pilots for World War II. There's several missing airliners. There's multiple others, you know, that again, that were coming out of bases for training that may have been lost. I will tell you, Wayne Lusardi is the Great Lakes airplane guy, and I would like to see, I had him here 5, 6, 7 years ago, probably before we got into the Zoom era. So I'm thinking about trying to have him come back again, maybe next year when we are done with Tuskegee, to kind of really give a good overview and talk about airplanes in the Great Lakes, because I think it's something that a lot of people are interested in. So, and I think with that, that is our last question here. Let's see if I can't make this work. I'm going to stop sharing, and here I am. I'd say it was lovely to see you all, and it was, even though I can't see you. Please have a really great evening. We look forward to seeing you again soon and hope that you can be a part of our ongoing program coming in the future.